Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am Jonah. I am here with Discover. Super excited to be having Christian and Eddie with us today, talk a little bit about startups without code. But before we get into anything, I just want to double check that our audio and our video is all good. So please hop in the comments. Let us know if you can hear us and see us all right. Christian and Eddie, would you give just a little hello and a wave to make sure everyone...
Hello, everyone.
How's it going? We're super excited to be here, Jonah. Thanks so much for having us.
Of course, super excited to have you. And real quick, everyone, feel free to call out in the comments why or like what you're excited to learn today, where you're tuning in from, maybe how you heard about Eddie or Christian or Discover. We love hearing all of those things. Appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. Also to set a couple expectations, if they're moving fast, or I know they've packed a lot into this presentation. So if you have to go to the bathroom or anything comes up, don't freak out. There will be a replay available after the event. It'll be here on the YouTube. It'll also be on the Discover event page and emailed to you along with the course offer, which we'll talk about a little later. Oh, here we got Heidi tuning in from New Haven and, oh, wow, all the way from South Africa. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Hello there.
Yeah, I don't know what time of day it is there, but I appreciate you taking the time.
Evening,
that's awesome.
Evening time, yeah.
Evening?
Nice.
Okay, that's not too bad. Eddie's got his time schedules all figured out.
Kind of.
Love it. And one more thing for everyone watching, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to pop them in the comments. Eddie will try to get to them as they come up, and we'll try and address them as they come up. But if you can, we will have a dedicated Q&A after the presentation where we can make sure to get to all of those comments. So if we don't answer a question, or if you can hold on to it, please wait until then to pop it in. Oh, just want to call out a couple more here from, and I got corrected here, New Hampshire. I'm so sorry, Heidi. There we go. New Haven. I'm not great with my states. Hi from India. This is awesome. Hey, thank you so much. Killer. Let's get started. I'll give a proper introduction here. So we have Christian and Eddie, like I said, and today we are going to be talking about building startups without code. We can expect this is going to be an interactive workshop that'll break down the exact strategies that non-technical founders are using to bootstrap their companies from just an idea to 20K a month in reoccurring revenue. A little background on these two. Christian is a serial entrepreneur and digital strategist with over 12 years of experience building startups, running accelerations, and consulting for Fortune 500 companies and celebrities. As a trainer, he has served as the co-director of a startup program that has helped over 100 startups go on to raise over 40 million in funding and get into accelerators like Techstars, Y Combinator, and 500 Startups. And Eddie, co-founder of No Code, data strategy and advertising expert. He has developed data and brand strategy for multiple Fortune 100 companies and lead product innovation, tapping into his experience building products and MVPs. He has mentored startups on topics like machine learning, agile product development, and no-code. He is also the founder of several no-code startups. The latest, Sizely, currently has over 50,000 users. I've talked to you two before, and I know this is going to be an awesome presentation, so I want to get the heck out of the way here and let you take over.
Awesome.
Sounds so fancy, those introductions.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Before we start, one quick comment to the audience. For many, this is a totally new subject, so feel free to ask us literally anything. Feel free to put them into the comments. Christian will start with the presentation. I will jump in between. I'll try my best to answer them throughout the presentation, but then also if the question is a little bit more complex, we're more than happy to answer it at the very end in full detail. So feel free to ask any questions on all of the topics we discussed in this presentation.
Love it. Sounds good.
Let's do this. No, I'm super excited as well. So thanks so much, Jonah, for the awesome introduction. Eddie, thanks a lot for also being here. Eddie's going to be speaking a little bit in just a moment, where he's going to bring us through some examples, case studies of things that have been built, things that we've built, things that have been built by our students, by the overall community. And no, it's super exciting. We put this on for so many awesome organizations, UCLA, USC, Princeton, a bunch of accelerator programs as well. And the aim here really is for us to help people empower themselves when it comes to building startups, specifically people who are non-technical. Eddie, how are you feeling about it?
I'm pretty good. I'm really excited about this. This is a presentation that we shared with many non-technical founders, entrepreneurs who also develop traditional technologies with code. And I think for many, and the feedback was always, it's mind-blowing. I don't want to overpromise here, but if you discover, this new way of building startups and, fulfilling new ideas into actual software, I believe you will get a lot of value from this. So I'm really excited to start this and, again, answer all of the questions that you guys have today.
Let's do it. Super exciting. Eddie, thanks so much for that. And we'll see him in just a little second. I'm going to change to my pitch deck. Excellent. So building startups without code, that's the name of this webinar, and it's a guide for non-technical founders. Before we jump into this, let me tell you a little bit about myself. Basically, I am born in Switzerland, but lived pretty much all over the world. I'm the founder of 3 different startups and have raised capital for 2 of those startups. I've had an exit, which is selling a company. More importantly, as Jonah sort of mentioned, I, for 3 years, was the director of a startup accelerator program where we helped over 100 startups raise more than $40 million in funding. Now that number is more like 50 million. And so throughout that experience, it was really interesting. What we would do, and this was based in Los Angeles, which is where me and Eddie live and run the company. Essentially, we would train about 8 teams. After that sort of training, we would put them on stage at Google and have them pitch in front of about 100 to 150 investors. And that was really just an awesome experience for me. It really brought me into kind of from an entrepreneur myself into kind of this facilitator and helping other people build their startups. I was always non-technical. And so I'll tell you a little bit more about how that completely changed when I met Eddie. But essentially, the accelerator that I was running, we trained companies like BuildLane. So Frank, he ended up raising $300,000 and getting into Mucker Lab, which is one of the big sort of Mucker capital invested in some of the unicorns that came out of Los Angeles. Also, Anna Mertzi, who after the program raised $320,000, got into Techstars, which is an investing accelerator. And also Chris, he's the head of Audio Cardio, which is an awesome app. You can listen to music and basically improve your hearing. So they created this awesome technology. He raised $500,000. This was really the traditional way of building startups that I was accustomed to. And about 7 years ago, I met Eddie. So Eddie is half German, half Russian, also lives here in Los Angeles. He used to be the head of product innovation for one of the largest independent agencies in the US, where he was actually building out prototypes, products, apps for brands, some of the biggest brands in the world that you might know. The thing that really struck me when I met Eddie and we started, blabbing about entrepreneurship, because we both were very passionate about it, was that he was spending on average $100 to $1,000 to build out these platforms, leveraging this innovative new thing, which at the time was not called no code. Today, it's referred to as no code. And so at the time, he had built Sizely, which essentially was a platform that we'll talk a little bit more about later. But he was able to build that in 90 days for $1,000. And it was when I met him at $12,000 in monthly recurring revenue. The most astonishing thing, though, was really that he had done that without hiring developers. He'd been able to do it without raising any money from investors or investing a bunch of his own money into it, and without leaving his full-time job at the time. So that really fascinated me. I was like, okay, this is definitely a new way of going about entrepreneurship that really excites me. So pulled him into the accelerator program. He became a mentor. This is us on stage at Google. And essentially, we were trying to provide all that value to the teams that we would train. Now, of course, we were only training 8 teams out of about 400 applications, which, for us was like, okay, it's awesome to have all this knowledge and know-how, but if we're not able to spread it to a larger community of people, we're kind of in the same game as everyone, which is to select people who have already figured it all out and help them raise capital and move it forward. But for people who are starting off, or for people who don't yet have a product, or for people who don't have revenue, the kind of early stages are very complicated. So we got together and basically built We Are No Code. which is essentially an institute for non-technical founders, where our mission is to empower the next generation of entrepreneurs and to democratize entrepreneurship in no-code, empowering this new generation of founders. So, it was super exciting. We created a program where we would teach people how to actually launch their businesses without any technical skills. And we've now grown to a global community of more than 350 startups around the world. We have people in more than 23 different countries and some really cool partnerships, which are awesome, from schools to accelerators, but also we're involved in the nonprofit sector a little bit. So let's talk about what we're going to cover today. The first thing is going to be why this year and moving forward, there's just so much opportunity. Then we're going to talk about some of the common mistakes that non-technical people face when they're building startups early on. And trust me, having looked at 400 applications every 4 months for 3 years, I can tell you that a lot of them are very similar. So we'll try to avoid you making the same ones in this presentation. Then we're going to introduce you to the power of no code. We're going to teach you how to build a startup without writing code, so leveraging these no-code technologies. And at the end of this, we will talk a little bit more about our program and do a Q&A so we can answer all of your questions. For those of you who hang out until the end, we're going to be sending you via email $1,500 worth of credits plus a startup toolkit. So it's a no-code startup kit is what we call it, and it allows you to get started immediately. Now, 2021 being the year of opportunity, the reason for this is because we've seen so many changes in behavior over this time period, and specifically through these crazy times, right? The way that people work, the way that people eat, the way that we buy, the way that we travel, the way that we learn, everything's really changing, and it can feel very a little crazy and overwhelming at times. But if there's something we've learned from the past, change essentially breeds opportunity. And when we look at the 2008 recession, it brought us some of the largest companies that we know today. This is actually, so, a lot of you know the logos that we see here, they all started during the recession. Of course, we know them as these monsters. Back in the day, they were literally kicking it off with just a small team. This is Marc Andreessen. He is one of the most notorious investors in Silicon Valley. He runs Andreessen Horowitz, which has invested in Airbnb, Lime, in Slack, in Lyft, Coinbase, just the number of companies that he's invested in are just crazy. And what he talks about is the fact, right, that every business is a software business. Like these days, it doesn't matter what business you're trying to get off the ground. You could be selling, software as a service. So like you're actually selling software is the product itself. You could be selling wood. There's going to be a platform required to be built. There's going to be ways you're going to need to distribute that online. Everything that is an opportunity these days is pretty much requires some kind of technical skills. So up until now, who has the ability to capitalize on these opportunities? Well, the answer to that is a very small subsection of the population. These people are called developers, coders, software engineers, and that's 0.3% of the world. So 1/3 of 1% of the world has created all of the experiences that you know today on the web or on mobile. Most of us look at this and we have no idea what it's talking about. And so that can be very frustrating. So what are people like ourselves who are not coders doing? What are some of these common mistakes that are leading all these people down the wrong decision-making process, and it's costing them a lot of money and time? Well, the first one is basically trying to raise money without traction. So what do we mean by traction? We mean pretty much either users that come back every single month or essentially revenue, right? So in 2005, with an idea, you could get funding. Now in 2021, you absolutely need to have revenue to get taken seriously by institutional investors, by investing accelerators. And this is not something that's commonly talked about. But years ago, a study from Wing Capital essentially looked at the numbers, and it was like checking out the deals, how many of those deals were going towards people, so investment deals were going towards companies that had revenue. 2010, only 9% of the deals were going to people who had revenue, meaning that a lot of startups who didn't have revenue were getting funded. By 2017, that became about 50%. And now these days, it really, about 80% of deals are going towards startups that already have revenue. And that leaves people who are non-technical in a really absurd situation, right? We have to not only go about, figuring out the opportunity, building out the platform, even though we don't know how to code, and going to market with that solution and generating revenue before we can be considered by some of these people who are willing to support us, either with capital or with acceleration. So let's talk about some of these other mistakes. The next mistake is, okay, I don't know how to code. I'm going to hire a developer, right? Hire developers. So the problem is most people just don't have the amount of money that's required these days. So if you go out there and try to get quotes from app developers, they're going to charge an insane amount for what you're trying to build, anywhere between $20,000 and several $100,000. I took several different examples here to kind of show how expensive this is. And the reality is that at this point, it's really, it's early stage. The startup is relatively risky. Putting this amount of money into a startup at this risk level is just really scary. And so it can cost a huge amount of money. And guess what? Developers will develop everything that you want because, they're paid by the hour. And that's a huge mistake when you're an early stage entrepreneur. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a little second. Now, hiring cheap developer is the next option, right? It's like, I don't have $20,000. What can I get done with $5,000? So we go overseas. We try to, get people to develop this in other countries. Cheap developers often ends up in spaghetti code. So what is spaghetti code? Spaghetti code is code that is essentially very buggy, that is unnecessarily written with a lot of complexity, and ends up being completely unusable. So, we've had experiences where we've had to literally, you're just being held ransom by someone overseas who's like, oh, you want to fix those bugs? Well, pay an additional X amount of money. It's really not a great option. And oftentimes you kind of get what you pay for, which is unfortunate. The other option that people usually go to as another big mistake is to kind of wait for a technical co-founder before you get started with your startup, right? Now, I'm not saying if you have a technical co-founder, that's awesome. But if not, you're pretty much looking like like this. This is from Pulp Fiction. You're just kind of looking around, trying to essentially get married, right? That's the way I like to compare it, right? The chances of finding a partner, a technical co-founder who fits all the criteria that you need is just very unlikely. So you need to have someone who has all the skills that are required, someone who shares your vision and mission for the sort of thing that you're trying to build out. Someone who is easy to work with, who you get along on a personal level for the next 3 to 5 to 10 years. And also someone who's willing to leave a very high paying job, because let's face it, if you're a good engineer, a good software developer, you can get a very nice job elsewhere. So oftentimes I see a lot of people wasting so much time going out to random events and trying to kind of, oh, well, I need to have a technical person to get this kicked off. And that's oftentimes a big mistake. We'll talk about that when we get into the no-code section and to show you how you can actually go about this without having to go down these paths. Another mistake is kind of trying to learn how to code. So this was a literal picture of me trying to learn how to code. It wasn't. But it's the feeling of frustration that you get when you start coding. It takes about 3 to 6 years to become a really good engineer. By that time, the opportunity that you're trying to sort of target is probably going to be already passed, or someone will have taken it. Probably the biggest mistake, though, beyond these ones, which waste a lot of time and money, is pretty much never taking action. So everyone has a friend or has met someone who continually talks about an idea that they've never taken action with. And you just kind of have this feeling of like, well, get started. It's like, stop daydreaming about what this idea could become and talking to people and doing research and kind of like overthinking this idea. Like, you should actually go about like seeing whether or not there is some market potential behind this idea by taking actions. Now, again, we will talk about that. But the big issue here is like all these people who are idea people, they now with no code have the ability to actually take action. So we'll talk about that in just a second. But the conclusion is that for people who are non-technical, they basically end up just running around in circles. They end up wasting a huge amount of time. Usually I see them, so the applications that would come through, it was usually like 6 to 18 months, sometimes 2-3 years, very little progress to show for it. a lot of wasted money. So sometimes it's just like, oh, I paid someone here, then I'm hiring a freelancer, then I'm hiring an advisor, then I need to hire lawyers, like all these unnecessary expenses early on, missing out on opportunities. We talked about that. And the worst one of all of these for me is actually giving up on the idea and yourself as an entrepreneur. I'm of the mentality that you can learn entrepreneurship. I've done it myself. The first couple startups were not easy, but I definitely know that basically you can become way better at this. And there are proven methodologies, and there are also amazing tools to be able to do that. So giving up on yourself and just thinking, oh, well, I might as well just stay in my job that I'm unhappy in, that's also not a very good solution. I think that all of us are looking to be fulfilled and to be able to take action on the things that we want. Whether we are right or wrong about the first or second startup, that's fine. But honestly, giving up on yourself is a terrible feeling thing. And I felt that once when I had failed one of my startups as well. I felt like, oh my God, am I just not made for this? Very bad. So let's talk about a couple of the misconceptions. The first one is I need to be technical to build my startup. The other one is I need to leave my 9-to-5. Oftentimes that's a huge risk. Don't just do that without having a backup plan or not having sort of proven out that this is a business worth really jumping full-time into. I need investors, or I need to build a $1 billion idea. These are all kind of old conceptions. This is kind of the old world, right? That's the old world of thinking. These days, not everyone has to build a $1 billion business. If you build a company alone or with one co-founder that's generating a couple $1 million and you can pay yourself, let's say, $500,000 a year, that's pretty amazing for most people. That's the dream, right? You don't have any bosses or anything, right? So in the old world, that was the issue, but not anymore. And so now I'm going to introduce you to no code. The basic sort of definition is just creating something unique, a solution to a problem that could have been done with code, but you chose to do it without coding. So if we look more in depth at kind of the history or evolution of programming, it makes a lot of sense. You had these punch cards back in the day, and that you had to feed into computers manually, right? And so it was kind of a frustrating process, but the reason why we would do this is because computers only understand at a base level ones and zeros. It's pretty much Morse code. And so we would feed these ones and zeros into the computer manually. Over time, and as computers got better, we invented programming languages, which would be a way for us to talk to the computer and explain to them what we wanted them to do with these ones and zeros. And what no code really is, and by the way, no code is also called visual programming. It's a visual interface or sort of building blocks that allow you to build software solutions without learning how to code and without learning how to understand coding language at all. So there's code behind everything that you're doing. You're just not necessarily going into those code lines to build the software that you want. So some people think of it kind of like, designing in PowerPoint with creating some logic like you would do in Excel, right? If we look at the tools, so this is basically the rise of a bunch of new tools. Back in 2000s, we had these kind of low code, let's call it, where it's like you needed to code a little bit, but mostly like no code. So platforms like WordPress, Drupal. In 2010, we started seeing other platforms which were proper no code, like you didn't have to learn how to code at all. Shopify, Wix, Squarespace, and you can create kind of some great experiences, right? But it was limited. You could only do like storefronts or landing pages, websites. You couldn't do much more, and it was very templated and sort of limited and restricted what could be built. These days in 2020, basically there's this entire new generation of tools which are way more flexible. You can build very simple or very complex software, and it's just super, super exciting. So that's really what this no-code movement is all about. It's about this whole new set of tools that you can leverage to build software and even automate systems. We'll talk about that at another point. But basically, there's an overwhelming number of tools now. And it's just very difficult to figure out which tool to use for what you're specifically doing. But let's put that aside for a moment, and let's talk about how no-code actually works. So from a design point of view, it's pretty straightforward. This is how we used to design. This is how you design in no code. So you used to do it just going into the text and editing it. And on the right-hand side, what you can see here is basically visual drag and drop, very intuitive. So kind of think of it like you're designing in a designer. Then when we create the logic, instead of doing it this way, where you have to get into the sort of HTML, Python, etc., we are doing it this way, where you can actually do it in plain English. Like, you don't have to understand all this complicated jargon or coding to be able to create logic. You know, it's kind of like, well, if this happens, I want that to happen too. So again, so many different platforms. Here are just a couple interfaces so you can see kind of what some of these interfaces look like. This looks a little bit more like a designer, like Photoshop. This also looks like a different kind of designer. This is for mobile apps, so mobile native apps. This is a tool that you can use to build web apps. Again, as you can see here, you know, it's basically if someone clicks a button, this is the logic. Then I want this to actually sign up a user. We want to send them an email, and then we want to direct them towards the homepage. So these are all things that you can do. Those are kind of the workflows that you can do within no-code. So lots of different tools. All of them look a little different, but the benefits is really where this gets exciting. So Forward Partner, who's an investment firm in London, they put together this graph that essentially showed the difference between the old model, which is just doing it the traditional way, and this new model, building with no-code. So let's just look at the key benefits here. Time to building your MVP or building a app or a first product. Usually it takes a year. With no code, it takes about 6 weeks. Of course, you have to learn how to build with these tools before you're able to do it in that time, but it just reduces by tenfold, basically, the time taken. The cost used to cost $50,000 to get things off the ground, now less than $1,000. So the example is also what Eddie built. We'll show a bunch of other examples that we've built as well. When it comes to the team, multiple people building the front end. So a front end developer, a back end developer, someone who's potentially taking care of the middleware, a UI UX designer, potentially a product manager. And now when we build with no code, you just have one person doing all of these different tasks. And that person before had to be highly technical, and these days doesn't have to be technical at all. And so this is really, you know, these benefits, let me just take a second here so these can sink in. It is quicker to build. It is cheaper to build. You can do it with only 1 or 2 people, and the capabilities, you can do it without any technical skills. So this is why, you know, some of the notorious investors in Silicon Valley, including Jason Calacanis, essentially has this quote about no code. Startups being able to get to year 2 with $250,000 in revenue without ever having a developer is the greatest unlock I can think of right now for our economy and for entrepreneurship. And I could not agree more with Jason. This is completely changing the game, and people have to start paying attention. With all that hype, now Eddie's going to come in and show us some real life examples so that we can get into the detail of this. Eddie.
All right, so now let's actually talk about some examples so you kind of get an understanding of how the software solutions can look like, what they will look like, and also what's possible. So perhaps the first example, which kind of like illustrates all of the points that Christian also mentioned, is a website called ClearSegment. It's a website that we built. It's a startup. It is a software business, so it's software as a service, a SaaS business, as you will. This whole business from idea to finished product has been built with no code in under 10 days. And the majority of it was more like planning and copy rather than the actual building. The total cost for this entire website and product was $40, like the total building cost. And then also the solutions that we used included Webflow, Airtable, MemberStack, and Zapier, just kind of like several no-code tools that essentially have certain features, be it either on the building side as well as the automation side. Next up, to really like hammer down and give everyone a really good understanding about the cost, the time, and also the solutions you can build, here's another example. So here we're talking about proofreader.ai, which is a website that allows you to upload any documents, pictures, PDFs, anything visual. And this website essentially proofreads the content for you. The whole website was built for $500 in 21 days. And the solutions that we used was Webflow, the Google Cloud Vision API. So in this case, it was an algorithm by Google that was provided to identify the text in images. And then we used the language tool API to essentially proofread the content for customers. Next up, and this is also an example that Christian mentioned early on, this is a website that I built, which is called Sizely. It's a website that allows online sellers around the world to visualize measurements. This website was built for $1,000, roughly a little bit less, I would say. The building time was 90 days, and the users, we currently have to update that. We're currently at 50,000 users, and the revenue is almost hitting 20K in monthly recurring revenue for Sizely alone. And again, built on no code, and the majority of all of the no code project, it is a good chunk of planning, and then essentially the execution to build as essentially the least amount of time that you need for that. Next up, we have a more interesting example called Clamly, which is a URL shortener that shortens your URL. You share that with someone else. They open it up. The second they start browsing on it, there's a cryptocurrency miner in the backend earning money per minute for you. That was more of an experimental product. The total cost to essentially build this particular product was $600, built in 2 weeks, 14 days. In its heydays, we had over 200,000 monthly users using Clamly, and the total revenue was $38,000. So granted, Clamly was only available for 6 months. Because we had essentially to shut it down because browsers disallowed the mining of cryptocurrencies. So this whole business model became obsolete. But nonetheless, for something that was built for $600 in 2 weeks, and getting a total revenue of $38,000 for 6 months was something that we were still proud of. So next up, to kind of like illustrate an example of how to build simple as well as more complex products with no code, there are a couple of differentiations. So number one is with no code, you can build functions, be it in this case on an app or on a web app or just like a traditional website with no code, such as the login function, the sign up function, the payment function. You have your database, your user management, where you essentially have different tiers of users, and then have various flows and page flows within your app or website, and then as well as notifications. So all of that can be already built with no code, quite simply. However, if you have a more complex solution that you're working on, you can essentially tie in outside sources into your app. So, for example, if you have an AI model that you want to include into your app to do predictions on your data or do any sort of recommendations, you could essentially tie it back into your app or a website. If you are requiring data sources such as weather data, traffic data, Google Maps data, or pretty much any data that is outside of your app, you can also tie that back into your application, into your app or website, and essentially have it stored there. Or if you are requiring to use services such as Amazon, Google, Microsoft, be it either for storage, if you're storing a large number of files, or if you're planning to use any of their AI models, you can also do that and essentially tying it back to your app or website via an API. That again sounds really scary, but it's essentially a way to tie back information from outside sources into your app, all with no code, right? So it's like in plain English, you can write the commands of like getting the data, saving your data, and essentially doing calculations on that data. So now I would like to share some examples from the community so you can essentially get an understanding of what the community in general is also doing with no code and what successes they see for themselves. So one example that I find really, really impressive is Newer Stay. So they're a website that is kind of like the luxury version of Airbnb. Nadim is a co-founder, a non-technical co-founder I would like to highlight. And with no code, they were able to scale Newer Stay to $5 million in annual revenue, which is mind-blowing. I'd say it's super mind-blowing for entrepreneurship overall. And then more importantly, since no code, the cost to build and maintain is so low, we're talking about a couple $100, that you don't necessarily need investors or funding. This whole notion around funding, and Christian really, really talked about this, has totally changed. Now you could essentially build startups, build software solutions without needing funding or investing, and essentially get it up to a healthy business that produces healthy revenue. So next up, we have another example. This is, in this case, Alessandro. He built, an app called Rizzo.app, which is free resources a free resource for low-income communities. This is something that started as a pet project because he saw the need in the community, developed that app for them in 4 weeks that essentially provides, resources around education, around income, around jobs for lower income communities. Something that Alessandro was really passionate about and released to help the lower income communities. Again, another example of what's possible to build with no code. Next up, we have Danny. I have to laugh sometimes because it's such a cool story. So Danny quit her corporate job, without a plan B. Then she discovered no code and was able to build Scribbly within 8 weeks after that. Scribbly is a content management solution, not a content marketing services for businesses. And she was within the first 12 months, she was able to bring Scribbly to $20,000 in monthly recurring revenue. I believe currently she's at $35,000 monthly recurring revenue, but also again demonstrating how quickly you can develop something and then essentially grow a healthy business out of it. Next up, and here we have a lot of examples, and I'll just run through it to give you an understanding of what is possible. So if you are planning to build apps such as an Uber, a Lyft, a Tinder, a WhatsApp app, or an Instacart app, where you require features such as geolocation, messaging, or real-time tracking of vehicles or positions, and so on, all of that can be and has been built with no code, either in the community or largely in the no code community. Those apps also work on iOS as well as Android. If you're planning to build apps such as marketplaces, like where you have an Airbnb, an Upwork, an Amazon, an Indiegogo, an eBay, or even a Fiverr, all of those have also been built in no code and can be built in no code, where you essentially require features such as a profile of, in this case, an Airbnb house, a house listing, and then also features that we perceive as a little bit more complex, where you essentially have multiple parties and you're trying to split the payment. All of that has also been built in no code, and actually there are very straightforward ways to build out functionalities like these. And then if you're into social networks and you're like, hey, I want to build the next social network, you can also start with no code. If you're looking for social networks such as YouTube, a LinkedIn, a Twitter, a Facebook, an Instagram, or even a Pinterest, where you essentially require features such as a messaging feature, a notification feature, or just like inherent features that are inherent to social networks, such as image uploading, video sharing, or even voice sharing. All of that can be also built in no code. And then lastly, this is the last slide of examples. If you are building some more interesting products, that are kind of like a breed between, a service as well as an application, you can also build services such as Netflix, a Salesforce CRM platform, a Pipedrive, which is a sales solution, or a messaging app, or like Slack, that can be built, as well as even an Eventbrite. We had several people in the community building Eventbrite, as well as an application such as Zoom, right, where you essentially allow individuals to have video conferencing, allowing for features such as video calls, streaming, and automation. So all of that can be built and has been built in the community multiple times. And again, by non-technical individuals that essentially, learned no code and were able to build those technologies. So we have a lot of additional examples. If you're curious, feel free to visit our website at wearenocode.com/showcase. I think we have 40 or 50 different examples, and they're of real startups, of real companies that are currently running their business all with no code. And I think that just like, if you're curious about if your ideas is possible to create, the answer in many cases it is yes, it can. And I hope that this section of our website gives you some more ideas on what can be built. One question that we get over and over again, especially from non-technical founders, is like, how long does it take to build be it a web app or a mobile app? Usually we say, if you're building something simple with a couple of features, here we're talking about a couple of weeks, 2-3 weeks. And the cost, and again, which I find super mind-blowing, is between $40 to $100 to build something very, very simple. If you're building something more complex that requires, information and data sources from third parties, maybe a machine learning model and so on, here we're essentially talking about a couple months. The cost is a little bit higher. Here we're talking about $100 or $300, and higher is in quotation marks because, if you compare this to the traditional model, no code, and this new approach really blows it out of the water of what you can do. So one question that we also have that we get over and over again: can you build your app with no code? And the simple answer is yes, you can. You can build your app, you can build your website, you can build any services that you have in mind, but it comes with a gigantic however. And that, however, will be, unveiled by Christian, that will essentially dive deeper into that building might not be enough. So Christian, you want to come on and essentially elaborate why having a product is just not enough for all of us?
I love it. I love being the big however. You can see in the relationship who's the good cop and the bad cop in this situation.
This guy's the bad one.
So the big however essentially is that building is just not enough. And the proof for that is that 90% of all apps in the App Store are zombie apps. So they haven't been used in the past 30 days. And also, the number one reason why startups fail, according to CB Insights, is because there's no market need for a product that has been built. So if we take the words of wisdom of one of the godfathers of entrepreneurship, his name is Steve Blank, he talks about build it and they will come, is basically what a lot of people do. They build it and just hope people will come. But he says that it's not a strategy, it's just a prayer. And I couldn't agree more. I mean, expecting that people will just flood towards your solution once you've built it is one of the big illusions of entrepreneurship, specifically for first and second time founders. And we all know that essentially a product is not a startup. Anyone who has been in the startup world for a while, there's actually a great quote that says, first time entrepreneurs are focused on product and second time entrepreneurs are focused on distribution. Because there are all these other things that we have to learn around building a startup to become successful and empowered entrepreneurs. So for example, simply knowing what customers actually want. So they might say one thing, they might do a different thing, they might buy it in a different manner. Understanding the business model that you can employ. There are 14 proven business models out there for digital companies, which is pretty much every company. What pricing model should you be using? Should you be charging a monthly subscription? Should you be charging a one-time fee? Should you have a combination? There are so many things that we have to learn around that. How can I go about sales? How can I even get sales? By starting creating leads through marketing. There are all these partnerships you have to create. There is building a team. There is, if you're looking to fundraise, like strategies around that. There's just a huge amount of knowledge that people need to know to be successful in their end goal. And so for people who are looking to build a company or to build any kind of product that people will actually use, it's really important to learn all these other things and not just focus in on building the cool new product, right? Ask Airbnb, they launched like 4 times before they were actually successful. It's much easier to build a product than to actually bring it to market in the right way. So now I'm going to bring you through the sort of step-by-step curriculum that we use and teach our founders to use when it comes to building their startups. The aim is to reduce their risk and increase the amount of sort of progress that they can see in a short amount of time. So this is kind of the bird's eye view, and I'll get into each one of these briefly. So first of all, you want to set the hypotheses. Just become very clear about what hypotheses are behind this startup. Then we want to do customer discovery, understand what people say that they actually want. After that, we don't want to just believe them. We want to build a first market test to essentially test the market. Are people taking an action that shows that they're willing to actually purchase this before you even build it? So you can build out this test leveraging no-code technologies. Then we're going to want to go out there and promote it. So sales and marketing. Of course, we want to measure things. We'll talk about that in a little bit more depth. After that, once we know that people want to buy it, then we're going to build out the specific features that they want, leveraging no-code technology. So again, really limiting those features. And then we can actually fulfill to that customer who is already lined up in your pipeline. So we're essentially building product at the same time that we are going to market and testing the market, facing the market realities, facing the operational realities behind your startup. And in that way, we increase our chances. But let's go one step deeper here. So step one, setting hypotheses. Let's talk about Airbnb. You want to essentially determine which one of these are key hypotheses, right? And then what you want to do is put these to the test to reduce the risk, because a high sort of a hypothesis with high risk or an assumption with high risk is essentially making your entire startup risky. And guess what? You're the one putting in time and money right now. So you're protecting yourself by reducing the risk. Airbnb, for example, one of their big assumptions, people who have second homes or who, or people who are homeowners are willing to rent out their house to random people. If that hypothesis was built, was proven not to be correct, they weren't willing to, then Airbnb's entire model, everything around Airbnb would be completely different as we know it today. So that's why it's important to set your hypotheses. Then we're going to go out and actually talk to customers. So create interviews and where we're not talking at all about our product, where we are understanding the problems that our customer base has and figuring out if our solution or the idea that we have in our head plays into what they're talking about when we talk about their problems. Again, I say don't talk about the product because you're just going to get them to be like, oh, that's cool. Yeah, that's not good. That's not good customer discovery right there. You don't want anyone to say, oh, I really like this. That's the mom effect. And then you essentially want to prepare the questionnaire. You want to interview customers. You want to analyze that data, find correlations between these different customers. So understand who your customer base or the beachhead market is, but also in what that specific problem is. You need to find something that's common in one specific segment of the market and also through several people in that market repeating the same problem over and over. Then we'll set up the test. So here it's all about testing what people are actually willing to do versus what they actually say they want. So, if I act like I've built the whole thing out and are people actually willing to come and, download the app? Are they willing to buy the product or click on a fake buy button? Are people willing to give their email? Are people willing to book a one-on-one call with you or a demo of the product even before you've built it? If the answer is no, building the whole thing is a waste of time. And so that's why it's kind of counterintuitive, but this is the best way to start your startup, the lean way, and to protect yourself as a startup founder. So the whole idea is you need to build a brand, you need to prepare all the content, then you're going to build it into an actual functional solution, leveraging no-code tools. After that, we're going to go ahead and set up tracking and analytics because you can't, what's the expression? You can't manage what you can't measure. So we want to be able to measure and see how people are actually using it. Is there a high bounce rate? What are people clicking on? Are people confused about certain areas? Are people thinking something that is a button is not a button? Are people getting even to that clickable button that you're trying to get them to take action on? These are all questions that you want to have information about to make smart decisions moving forward. So then you go out there and you start promoting. The idea is that you're going to essentially want to start acquiring users and engage with them. And over time, what you're doing is creating a pipeline of future customers who are actually going to tell you exactly what it is that you need to build once you get into that deeper build. And so, you essentially want to do a very targeted outreach. You want to do this not scalably, like not highly scalable for the moment. You want to do things at first in startups that are not scalable. Learn about the process, about the customers, and then once you've essentially learned all those things, you're going to be able to create automations. You're going to be able to make this scalable, et cetera, et cetera. But you're really after a huge amount of feedback as you're going out there and selling. There's going to be pushback that you can integrate in the message that you are putting out there when you're talking about your product, all sorts of things. Then we're going to jump into building things with no code. So essentially, you are going to build the features that they have requested and are willing to pay for. You're going to need to identify the best tools the best no-code tools specifically on what you're trying to build. So every single startup is different, and there's going to be a different tool set that's best suited for your use case. And then you're going to want to build only the key functionalities. So when we talk about MVP, what does that mean? It's a minimum viable product. So this is, let's talk about an example of it, an MVP being built the right way and then the wrong way. Let's say that we're trying to solve the transportation problem. This would be the wrong way about going about it, right? Because none of these iterations are essentially solving the problem for the individual until the final iteration, right? It's only with the car that you can go quicker from one point to the other. You can't do anything with two wheels. You can't do anything with half a car. And it's only until you've invested all this time and money into this car that you essentially are able to sell it to a paying customer and solve their problem. Give them the value that they need, which is essentially, I need to get quicker from A to B. A much better way to do it is this. You want to build something quicker than just walking? Great, I'll build a skateboard. Excellent. I charge a lot less than I'm going to charge a car, but it's solving the person's problem. And then over time, you're building new iterations of the product that get better at solving the problem and giving the value to the customer. The customer is only paying for the value. And so if the value is to essentially get quicker from one place to another, we know that a skateboard can be better than walking. A bicycle is quicker than the skateboard. A scooter is quicker than the bicycle. And every iteration you can sell to an end customer. So you're not going super out of pocket until you have something someone is willing to pay for. And that's the main point here. The last step is just the glorious step, which is fulfillment. Once you've created it, then you just deliver it to your customers. You take in that money, and congratulations, you've made your first dollars in revenue. And of course, everyone thinks this is the last step. This is the first step of endless feedback and improvements. You want to prioritize the next features based on what your customers want. And that's the way that you're going to continually improve your product and build that skateboard into a car over time. So now I just want to congratulate you. Essentially, you are light years ahead of most founders. And the great news is that you can get started immediately, right? You know that no code exists now. There are so many tools out there that you can leverage. You know the basic methodology that you should be going about it with in terms of bringing products to market. And there's so many resources for free on the internet that you can go ahead and learn. Now, what we've learned at We Are No Code is that the technologies, all that is out there, but there are so many other things where people are getting stuck at the moment. So let's talk a little bit about those. There are too many tools out there. Which one should I use for my startup and for my phase? That's a huge thing that people get stuck with. They end up just endlessly using lots of tools, shiny object syndrome, they get lost, and then they get frustrated. The next one is that they don't really have an idea of how to get started building a startup. It's like, what are the first steps? Like, can you run me through these first steps? Like, how do I have to actually do it step by step? That's a big problem. They're kind of piecing things from all over the internet and trying to learn and figure out what's the next best step for them. The other thing is that all of us as founders just require a huge amount of support. As we're going through the process, we also need accountability, and that's often really a problem. If you're just trying to type on forums like, hey, help me, it's not a good support system, specifically when you are an early stage and first or second time entrepreneur. And then, of course, people have limited time, right? And limited money. So they need to take an accelerated route because now we're competing against people who are second, third, fourth time entrepreneurs, and we need to really up our game. So that's where we really talk about the no-code startup, where we are able to essentially provide a huge amount of support as people go through the startup journey. So let's talk about the program just a little bit. It's an action-based program for non-technical founders, and we help people build their technology, launch it in the market, and make their first dollars in revenue without writing a single line of code. I'm sorry if I'm not following the exact things that are written on the screen. So again, we empower non-technical founders, and we really upskill them and make them founders of the future. We help them build their apps without being techies, learn those tools that they can leverage regardless of what they're building in the future for this startup, for the next startup. Then how to actually launch that in the market, go-to-market strategy, how to acquire users, turn those into customers, and then really just overall help them save a bunch of money and time, focusing on the right things at the right time. So it's kind of a mix between a product school where you would learn how to build products. Usually you would do that with coding. We teach people no-code tools, a curated list of no-code tools. And then also Startup Accelerator, which is where we teach people how to actually build businesses. Now, what we provide are essentially a combination between the know-how, a step-by-step curriculum, coaching. We do weekly coaching sessions. We have networking sessions now, and we've been doing more and more of those. We have a massive perks and discount package for people to save as much money as possible as they're going along the startup journey. And we provide video support as you're going through this. So all of that is pretty much the program package that we have. I'll quickly bring you through the curriculum. I know we're soon arriving at time. So I want to leave enough space for us to have a Q&A as well. Essentially, the curriculum looks something like this. We help people ideate and validate their ideas. Then build and launch their startups, and then sell and grow their startups. So we prepare people from idea all the way to raising capital or trying to get into an accelerator program, or bootstrapping, which means just growing your own business, owning 100% of it. We have modules that cover finding and evaluating ideas, customer discovery and development, very specifically, branding and content, so how you can build a brand, how you can create all that content without being a designer, developer, or copywriter, all that stuff. Then how you can actually go about building, right? So building that first market test, then setting up tracking and analytics, click by click. Then building your MVP. We have different tracks for this because we teach different no-code tools and everyone's startup is different. Then we also talk about things like sales and marketing. We have modules that once you've gone out there and got first paying customers, great. Now let's start talking about pitch decks, how you can structure those, financial forecasts, and then fundraising and accelerators, how to increase your chances. So essentially the whole package includes the step-by-step curriculum where you get access to the videos. You can watch it in your own time. It's a detailed breakdown. You can take it at your own pace, and you can start at any level. So if you're just looking to build, you've already done all the beginning, that's great. If you come in and you have several ideas, that's also fine. The idea is we're trying to bring something that most of the educational institutes are just not doing. There's so much fluff out there. We really focus on action. So we essentially provide templates and workbooks, blueprints for every single thing that we teach. Half of it is really teaching, again, the go-to-market strategy, sales, business models, pricing, marketing, how to build a team, and then also a curated list of no-code tools. So here are some of the tools that we teach within the program. We are constantly adding new tools because we are developing the curriculum as well. Every Friday, we also get together because we essentially work with a team of about 10 to 20 founders, and we do group coaching every single week directly with myself and Eddie. So it's working with us. Ask us any questions. We're basically getting updates. This is Heidi, actually. She now is at, I think, $7,000 in monthly recurring revenue with a SaaS platform in the healthcare space. And this is us basically answering one of our questions. Personalized feedback. And also breaking through your roadblocks. Feeling stuck is terrifying when you're a founder. You don't know what to learn, and that's where we're here to help you. We record all of these, so any feedback that we give you, you don't have to write down. You can go check them out in our library. You can rewatch the feedback, learn from other people's questions, and generally, it's just really awesome. But of course, we're not going to just meet up and support you once a week. We also have private video support channels with every single one of our founders, where we actually send people videos. They send us questions, we send them a video back. So if that's a technical question, we're going to be able to show you click by click how to resolve it. If it's check out my pitch deck before I apply to this accelerator, we can record a video giving you feedback on the deck as we are scrolling through the deck in that video. So it's really, really valuable, and it helps people really get feedback. Again, video answers, just a video speaks so much louder than 1,000 words. And to get, out of those moments where you just feel a bit stuck throughout the week. Then we have a massive perks package. So $300,000 worth of discounts and freebies. So this just saves a lot of money for people. And we continually grow that list out as well. We have people reaching out to us all the time, proposing for them to give a discount to our students because we're a thriving community. And then, of course, to find some awesome tools, not only just to build, but then also to scale. There are, all sorts of discounts that we have. Here are a couple. So, for example, $100,000 worth of credit for AWS, 6 months for free on Zendesk, Hotjar for 6 months for free. Airtable, $500 in credit, which is a no-code tool. Adalo is a no-code tool, 6 months for free. I mean, we just have so many discounts, and I could continue talk about them, but there's 175, so I'm not going to waste your time. You also get access to this awesome and growing and thriving community of other founders, so you can connect with other founders. You can essentially get feedback. We've seen people starting to partner with each other now. Some people get together and co-found companies, and also just accountability buddies. Lately, we've also been putting on these founder speed networking events. So think of it like a chat roulette, so quick video networking sessions with founders in our community. Again, people have found co-founders this way. being able to share ideas, exchange skills. We have lawyers, we have people in the medical field, we have people who are MBAs, we have people who are PhDs, we have construction people, we have people in real estate. I mean, I can just name, it's such a diverse group of people, but everyone is in the same mindset and you get to benefit from that. So, couple details. You can we have open enrollments, so you can enroll immediately. You can start where you want. You can go at your own pace, and you can continue where you left off. And our aim is to bring you from this traditional path, which is super hectic and usually costs about $50,000 in 1 year, and we bring it down to this. Of course, there's no straight line in entrepreneurship, but we bring that down to about $1,000 and 3 months of your time in terms of building cost and time to bring your idea to market. So the idea is that you're achieving 6 months that the average person does in 3 years. Now, the tuition for our program, or the cost of our program, is $2,000. So that's the same as a credit at a major university. And, essentially, we right now are putting on a massive discount as part of this thing, right? This wouldn't be an awesome presentation unless we had a super cool discount. So if you go to our website, you can absolutely apply, and it's $2,000 for our tuition if you get in. But for today, we are not only reducing the cost of the program, but also opening up enrollment, direct enrollment for the next 7 days, where we give you 50% off the entire package. You can get everything for $997, and that is for lifetime access to everything that I've just mentioned. The accelerator modules, the no-code modules, the perks, the 60 hours of coaching material, so pre-recorded, like the recorded sessions that we do in the coaching, those live weekly coaching sessions, the private video support channel, founders community, the interactions with other founders. Oh my God, there's so much. For those of you who are interested in paying in multiple, sort of have a payment plan, we do have a three pay. So the single pay, actually you save $200 by going through that. But for $397, you can get started today. Again, this offer is going to be accessible for the next 7 days as part of this partnership with Teachable Discover. So make sure to claim your discount right here. If you'd like to work with me and Eddie and the rest of the We Are No Code team, we'd be stoked to work with you. Again, this is a repeatable framework. So you can, once you learn these skills, learn hard skills, do the work, learn the process of launching startups, and you can use that not only to launch one startup, but to launch several ideas or startup companies. On top of that, we have a 30-day refund guarantee. No other educational institute will ever give you this. We provide part of our, basically just the videos are what you get through Teachable. The rest is a full-on learning program. And so, that's, we're not just a course, we're absolutely an educational program and a support system. So we can essentially be your co-pilots as you're running your first startup and acquiring the skills. Now, the cool thing is that, so basically no risk, right? There's no risk in joining, so I highly recommend that you do. Tax deductibility. If you have a business, you can actually write this off as an educational expense. But more importantly, if you have a full-time job right now, your employer most likely has educational expenses that you can tap into to get that covered. And we can send you an invoice that basically mentions that you are learning how to build software without coding. So it's basically like a coding camp, and you can get that fully paid by your company. So it's just really, this is like an awesome opportunity for you. And we've only just realized that this is a thing. So we're definitely, interested in empowering more people through this mechanism as well. For me and Eddie, we do this because honestly, our founders are just so awesome and are seeing amazing results within our program. We kind of created this program because we wished we had this program. Years ago, 15 years ago, specifically when I started, I was non-technical, I had no experience, and I made all the mistakes that we pretty much mentioned within this. I just wish that I had had a better support system. I wish that all these tools were out there. And so when we read these kind of comments, it just really, it really shows us that we're fulfilling that mission that we're trying to do, which is how do we empower a much larger population of people? In every single country, in every single sort of class, how can we, get other people to pay for people's tuitions, like your company, for example, if you work a full-time job. And so, yeah, that's what we thrive off of, essentially, other people's success. And the more we see that right now, building big bridges between us and all these accelerator programs and investors, because obviously, as I was the director, I have a lot of connections in that world. So again, just all in a sum, it is a step-by-step action-based program. You're going to learn hard skills. You can focus on building and testing, not just theory, building pitch decks and talking about entrepreneurship or listening to podcasts. You can build simple and complex websites, also build simple and complex apps. Do you get hands-on coaching? And absolutely. Do you get access to this global no-code community? Yes, you do. You get this massive perks package. You also get, this is actually the most effective option that you have out there. We've literally had people who have been at the UCLA accelerators, both of them, and then who joined our program because they learned a bunch about entrepreneurship, but they were still stuck when it came to actually building and launching and testing. So that's the big problem that's happening right now in the industry. So again, no risk because you have a 30-day refund guarantee and you can build one or several startups. Because our goal for you, again, is for you to become a founder of the future. What is the founder of the future, Christian? Well, it's someone who can identify and fine-tune opportunities very quickly. It's someone who can actually build their MVPs, their first products, cost effectively and without developers. It's someone who can iterate on their ideas and turn those users into paying customers without having to be some kind of a hard sale, like a hard salesperson, and essentially someone who's able to build that startup that they've always wanted to build. Because in the end of the day, we're in a time right now where self-reliance is becoming more and more important. And we believe that the future of the workforce is a workforce who can choose the times in which they work. They can build the companies that they dream of. They can solve problems that are important problems for this world. They have self-reliance, and they can essentially lead the life that they want to live. For us, this all comes down to kind of like freedom. And it might sound cheesy, but that is just the feeling that we have gotten when we also started building it this way. So it's incredibly powering and inspiring to us, but also to everyone else who has built this way. And I really just encourage people, like, if you have had all these ideas in your mind, never taking action, like, get started. You should have gotten started yesterday, 2 months ago, but don't feel guilty about that. Just get started today. And it's okay if you're not right about the first idea that you come out with. It's okay if you fail a startup, as long as you're not spending all your savings and 3 years of your life doing that. So join the movement. If you'd like to work with me and Eddie, we'd love to have you in the program. If not, that's fine. Just go out there and get started. So now I'm done with this emotional speech that I get into. I'm going to start crying or something. But essentially, we're going to, so I do have download the toolkit, but actually I realize that you're going to be receiving it via email. And now I just want to thank you so much for joining us and to stay until this point. If you want to join us, click the link on the right-hand side. Let's jump into the Q&A. Eddie, come live so I can catch my breath again. And let's answer some of these questions.
All
right. Thank you both so much. I think this is the second event I've hosted with you, but every time you talk and do these presentations on no code, I'm just like losing my mind, both with the cost of a startup like that and then just with what's possible. It's wild. We live in the coolest time for technology. Yeah. It's so cool.
And I think also individuals that know of the old approach of like the traditional software development and see this, it's just mind blowing, right? And I think for many non-technical founders, they don't know like the dark side of developing technology, to just see no code, and they're like, oh, that's cool. But if you actually compare and contrast both of the sides, it's just mind blowing, right? And I think to Christian's point, it's like we see more and more people being independent, identifying opportunities and building them by themselves, for the fraction of the cost. So it's we're both fans of it, and we clearly also have you on board on that.
Yeah, it's so cool. Well, and so for everyone watching, if it wasn't clear, pop into the comments if you have any questions. We have Christian and Eddie for a few more minutes here. And also feel free to drop in maybe just something you learned or something you're excited about. Maybe an idea you've had that is now just bubbling in your mind with a new way to approach it. I know while people are hopping on the comments, I had a couple questions for you, if I can. I know there's either way, doing no code is a cheaper option than going out and hiring a whole team in all of this. But I would love to get an idea. Obviously, the apps or the programs or websites you build can be cheaper. But do you have a range for someone who's looking to get started of what like a year's budget or what you should have in the bank getting started? Because there are those marketing costs and all of that, which it's cool that you can spend less on employees and put more into marketing. But if you're really gung-ho about this, what's a range of budget you can look for as an individual?
I think just on the building costs and the maintenance and essentially, just having, all of it working on a monthly basis, on the low end, between $35, on the high end, $250 on a monthly basis, right? And then also something that most entrepreneurs totally forget to put into account is marketing costs, right? You also need other software such as a CRM system. You might need automation tools. You might need, analytics tools and so on. And when Christian and I designed the program, we're like, okay, cool. We figured out the building part. That's something we can really, but how about the additional costs that most people don't see? And that's why we created this $300,000 package of, where you get access to over 175 different services, including CRM platforms, automation platforms, chat platforms, pretty much everything that a founder, technical or non-technical, needs to get started, right? In many instances, we give you $300,000 of discounts on that, but there are some software that that costs $2,000-$3,000 on a yearly basis, and they're just waived for 2-3 years, right? So
I mean, a great example is actually like ClearSegment, the one we mentioned earlier, where it's like $40 to build 10 days. So that one actually, we calculated it, and it's $235 for 6 months of maintenance. So $40 to build it. And then 200. Of course, if you had hundreds of thousands of users, which is a great problem to have, it would cost more because you'd have to host more, there would be more costs associated. But simply to run the platform, $235. That's insane. That's 1 hour. That's like 1 hour of a good developer's time. It's like, wow. So it makes a big difference. Now, the big thing that we've noticed is that there's definitely a need for, these technologies are out there. There's a need for people to connect these people with these technologies in the right way. Because right now there's so much possibility, but the thing that needs to catch up are the humans and the people to actually start acquiring these skills. And that's where we're going to see the biggest game changers in terms of like, the way this can affect our different communities, entrepreneurship and overall, right?
Yeah. And I think one caveat for anyone that is new to building software or building software startups, I think the beauty of software is that your marginal costs are like pretty tiny, right? You're paying $35 if you have 2 users on it or 1,000 users on it, right? So like the cost usually increase per user by like half a cent, so you could essentially scale it to pretty much infinity, right? Without breaking the bank.
Well, so kind of a follow-up, and I'm partly just getting you to call this out again, because one of my questions when you were going was, where is a good resource for figuring out if your idea can be done with no code? And I know you do that as part of the course too, but if you're just trying to see, like, is this a good investment for me? Am I out of my mind? You had mentioned there's a place on your website where you can browse that. Exactly. And then can you call that out again? And then is there just another kind of like litmus test you can go through for these just to know if your idea is worthwhile?
Yeah, so we have a chat feature on our website where our team can essentially respond and essentially answer all of your questions that you have around your idea or no code or just the program in itself. So our team
and it's real people, by the way. So sometimes there isn't anyone there. Like, we're not going to give you some kind of a chat bot who's just like, hello, what do you want? And like, no, this is real people. So sometimes you come and there aren't people there.
Exactly. And then also for individuals that like a more personalized approach where they're like, hey, I talked with someone over the chat, but I would love to talk to a human to really be sure that this is the right program. We have also a free consultation call where individuals can essentially book a call, make sure that, you know, their idea can be built out. Because in many instances, especially on those calls, it's all about, you know, helping individuals avoiding mistakes. And sometimes we see individuals coming in with, you know, a couple of assumptions that we just like, you know, try to, you know, educate on, and just to, and even like the free consultation calls. If you're just curious about an idea, just want to learn more, use the free consultations. You know, it's like free. You can essentially ask us any questions on that, and then see if you're a good fit or not.
That's so cool. I appreciate so much you give those resources so people can really figure out if it makes sense for them or what they need before they get going. That's really awesome.
I mean,
yeah, and actually, I still take some of those calls because we really want to.
Hey.
Yeah. So some of the calls, I actually take them myself because we continually like, and this is a big thing that you learn when you run companies, is like, you need to have your finger on the pulse, you know, even if you have other people doing things in your business, you need to understand in depth what's happening on the ground level. And, you know, I'm always like, it's always kind of great to jump on the calls because it's like, I get that FaceTime sometimes with some students. Now, others will be dealing with some members of our team, which is also, you know, they're highly experienced in no code and entrepreneurship. So that's also great. But yeah, that's another tip for founders, you know, don't try to delegate everything all the time.
Right. I had one more question I wanted to. I after the last event I did with you, I talked to a couple software designers that I know, and they were, of course, protecting their own egos, being like, "Well, I don't know if you can do this or that." But I imagine some of these ideas get to a point where maybe they need a little more customization, or they need a little more just control over it. Is it pretty easy to take a no-code based business and transition into that? Is that kind of typically where that's a step in the company, or do some of these companies also just go on as no-code into Continuum?
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that. And just to kind of like, you know, every time when you talk to, it sounds strange, but traditional people that are familiar with the traditional approach, and I've personally worked with many developers, with many product people, and so on, and that's why we essentially, you know, moved into no code, because it's just more agile. You essentially get a little bit of tension because, you know, you have people that are sitting in their armchair and like, well, I'm not sure if this works, and so on, right? But if you talk about cost, timing, and essentially what you can build, you know, there's like no arguing anymore. When it comes to transitioning from your no-code app to like full no-code, that's possible. I would just like show an example where, especially if you're building a startup in the early stages, there's a high degree of uncertainty about what features need to be built, you know. So with no code, you can essentially experiment quite quickly of rolling out features and removing features. If you get to a point where you're like, we have this one feature that does, you know, real-time AI machine learning on our data, and we currently have, you know, 50,000 users using our platform at the same time, that's essentially where you will see performance issues with no code. And also, you know, some of the features that are very, very custom, you probably, you know, see also some issues. But at that time, it is very justified and granted to essentially say, okay, we learned so much within the first 6 months of what features are needed and not, and now let's essentially, you know, build it out fully for scalability to 1 million users with all of the features that we want in traditional code, which also basically means that throughout the 6 months, you saved so much cost on identifying the features, and then essentially you probably have the amount of money to essentially build it out and with traditional code. So
yeah, people have scaled no-code platforms to hundreds of thousands of monthly active users. So let's just be very clear about this.
Yeah,
like we're not just talking about little games. I actually just looked at a tweet right now. Two of my friends who are running companies that are no-code based. We're talking about running companies that are servicing like large enterprises. We're talking about companies that are like fully built with no code, you know? And so, yes, in the same way that whether it's built with or without code, as you scale up, you're going to have to actually, you know, rebuild parts of the infrastructure, rebuild parts of the app completely, regardless of whether it's code or no code. It's just like people completely underestimate what no code is capable of. And the more important thing is to actually just like start learning these tools, understand that it's an iterative process. Don't try to build the car before the skateboard. and oftentimes the bigger issues, like it's funny because like most of the time when you see people fail startups, it's not because of like, oh, I built this thing in no code and then it got so big that then it couldn't hold it in no code, and then I tried to transition, it failed. No, if you're in a point at which you need to move away from no code because you can't, because you can't scale further, you are in a really good position. And if you haven't, and if you're not, and it might mean that you haven't even given thought to like actually having a business model, which brings us back to like, no code's not the biggest problem you're going to have. When you're building a startup, you're constantly going back between the customer, the product, build more product, understand more the customer and how to get to more people and the distribution. So that quote I said earlier is like real. Like first time entrepreneurs obsessed about product. Oh, but I want my app to have this and that and the other. And second time entrepreneurs, they're like, it's all a distribution game. And it's and oftentimes you don't have to, technology just allows you to scale the number of people that you bring the benefits of what your product has to, right? When we basically, so it's, people are not paying for a feature. People are not paying for AI. People are not paying for any of these like nerdy things that you want in your app. They're paying for a value. What do they want to use Tinder for? To meet someone. Does it take care of the algorithm built behind it that automatically matches you with this, that? No, they don't. So it's just about the early stages of startup. It's really just about understanding all these things. Building startups is counterintuitive, completely counterintuitive. It's not because you're an executive at Google that you're well positioned to build a startup. Why? Because you usually have teams of people who could just do all these other things that you don't do. And you're just kind of a manager who, oh, you do this for me. Great. Now designer, give me like a spec on this. Oh, now developer, integrate that. Now, entrepreneurship is totally different. And if we want to start increasing the number of people who are successful in entrepreneurship, we have to upskill them with kind of more than just one skill. So, it's funny, me and Eddie just like, we feel like we're doing startup therapy because it's also like teach people the hard skills, but then also there's such a big human aspect to this. If you lose motivation, that's a bigger reason why people fail startups than anything else. Like keeping the motivation levels high when like, when you don't feel on a good day, you just feel like, what am I doing with this thing? I don't, that's why a support system is just of utmost importance. And people just underestimate that, it's, but anyway, it is what it is. We can only you can only bring a horse to the water, but you can't make them drink. So
Right. But I appreciate that was exactly what I was trying to explain to my developer friends too. Is like, yes, you may need a developer in the future, but then you have proof of concept. You have the ability to you already have a product versus starting in that point, which is so cool. Yeah. I love the access that gives to just solopreneurs, entrepreneurs to get started now rather than sitting forever on their butt trying to write the perfect proposal or something like that. It's so cool. We do have to wrap up with time, and we didn't have any other questions coming in, probably because you guys kick butt with your performance and your presentation. It's always so informative. You answered all of my questions beautifully. I did want to say for everyone watching, just to make very clear, the link for the course is in the YouTube comments. It's also in the descriptions and will be emailed to you along with the replay of the video if you want to go back and watch this again. For everyone watching as well, please like and subscribe to the Discover YouTube channel if you like presentations like this. We're trying to bring more creators and entrepreneurs like these two out to share with you and give such good value. Before we wrap up for the day, I did want to ask you both if just you have one last little parting bit of advice or any last little thing you wanted to say for those watching who are starting on their journey for building a business.
Yeah, I think I've built many businesses throughout my entire life. And especially looking at the first businesses, I spent way too much time thinking and fantasizing about features and how it would be and all of that. I mean, like I spent 3 months on a logo once. I spent 3 months on a logo, right? And I asked people that are also very indecisive, as I was at that time, if the logo is correct. And they essentially gave me more suggestions on how it would look like. Right? It's a pure waste of time. So I would say if you're serious about an idea or you have an idea in mind, or you want to acquire the skills on building startup on a routinely basis, pretty much, the best time is to start now. I mean, it sounds so cliche, but it's so true in entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
And also, I think my big advice, maybe more on a personal level, it's like give yourself the freedom to fail. Give yourself the freedom to be wrong. Don't attach this idea to your own self-worth. Don't don't think that when don't look at the guy who's 5 steps ahead of you and feel envy. That will kill your motivation. Just start learning through action. Just start taking actions, start building things and breaking things, and start getting comfortable with that process too. Because honestly, one of the biggest things for entrepreneurs is to let go a little bit of their perfectionism and to just have the courage to just get started. So
I love that.
Those would be my words.
Yeah, agree.
Love it. Everyone watching, please hop in the comments. Thank Eddie and Christian for their time. I appreciate you both so much. Always have a blast, and I'm always just like cogs turning after these presentations. And just one last, can you just call out where can people find you? Where is it? Just wearenocode.com?
Exactly. So our website is wearenocode.com. As mentioned, you can check out the showcases. You can explore all of the discounts that we have. I also believe in the Discover page, we also have a little bit more information on that as well. If you wanted to chat with someone, just go to wearenocode.com. There will be a chat pop-up, chat button. Click on that, start a conversation with any of our teams, regardless of what questions you have. Maybe some of the questions that we haven't covered here, feel free to do that. Also, we have a button to book a call. So we try to be as accessible as possible because we realize there's a lot of education around this particular topic needed. So we try to educate as much as possible.
And lately also, we have a YouTube channel. We've been putting out videos to really help people with entrepreneurial things, empowering non-technical founders. So it's basically me teaching like little lessons around entrepreneurship, around a number of different things. Some of them are no code, some of them are not related to no code. All about, it's the _1 channel for non-technical entrepreneurs. That's what we're going for. So if you'd like to learn some tips, completely free, you could just type We Are No Code or just We Are No Code and into your YouTube search, and you will find it.
Awesome, love it. Well, thank you both so much again. We got to wrap up for today just for time's sake, but appreciate you both so much, and thank you for being here.
Thank you to everyone.
Thanks for everyone who watched. Take care.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.